let's make something. Today we're starting on the foods for this feast table. First I'm going to show you how to make a polymer clay lemon cane. This is kind of the parlor trick of the polymer clay world, where it's pretty easy to make, but it looks quite impressive, so I do like this a lot. I haven't made one of these in years. So you can see I started with white, yellow, and translucent clay. This is Fimo Soft. And I mixed a little bit of yellow into the translucent. That's what this little cheese wheel is here. And I'm adding a thin sheet of white in between all the segments. I'm doing a total of 8. You can do as many as you want, but the more you do, the harder it is, really. It's looking like a lemon already. So I'm just pressing in the edges of the segments and then adding a little snake of white clay around all of those to give it more of that teardrop shape as you cut through it, which is more like a real citrus slice. Wrapping it in white for the pith. That's just under the peel. If you look at a real slice of lemon, you'll see the white pith is much thicker than the yellow peel. And the key to making these canes successfully is to compress them at exactly the same rate all the way through so they don't get misshapen, which is very hard to do. So you see me adjusting it a lot, pinching it with my fingers to try to make sure it's the same width all the way around. And the rolling. Now I've edited this down obviously, but the rolling probably took me about 20 minutes to get all the way down. And as soon as each segment got too long, like wider than my hand width, I would cut it in half like this, and then only work with half. But you can see, now that it's all the way down, that design is preserved, but it's much smaller than I would be able to make it if I was making this size by hand. I do really love these. And now hopefully it'll be years until I have to make another lemon cane because I have these all stored up in a box. I'm making this, I'm just pinching the back of it, sort of like a chocolate chip, just so that it's shaped kind of like half a lemon. And now the oyster barrel. I had some tiny decorative, I think they're clam shells, those little shells, and then also some broken shells and gravel. So I figured I would use broken shells and gravel to look like other oysters in the bottom of this barrel. You'd barely be able to see them, but I figured that would be a good space filler. And then I chose the smallest of the clam shells to be oyster shells. And I mixed up some clay that is mostly translucent with a tiny touch of magenta and black. Because if you look at photos of oysters on the half shell, they're sort of a pinkish gray. So I pressed the clay into all of those shells, just sort of lumpy. It's nice oysters are so lumpy, you don't really have to worry about the shapes too much. All in place, glued them down, glued in that lemon half. And then if you look at real oysters, you'll see the muscles of them, like I say, pinkish gray, but the edges are black. So I used some black acrylic paint just to lightly touch the edges. And now I'm using some UV resin to make them really look moist and shiny. I think they came out pretty well. I put a little gloss glaze over the lemon because the lemon also should look, shiny and juicy, but not as much as the oysters. And now I'm cutting up meat scraps to go into the brawn, also known as head cheese, but we'll get back to that. Now I'm mixing translucent gray and a little bit of brown to make a Cumberland sausage. It's funny, you look at sausages and you don't really realize that they mostly look gray except for where they're browned in the pan. So, starting with a grayish brown. Adding some coffee grounds, which is a good trick for any sort of chunky seasoning in miniature food. And they're free if you drink coffee. So I'm adding just a pinch of those grounds into this gray clay. And Cumberland sausages are often made all in one long length and then rolled up. You see this for things like kielbasa as well. And then this sort of half worked. I was trying to get it brown just along the edges of the coils, exactly as it would get browned in a frying pan. But the pastels didn't work too great. Later on, I figured something else out. These are Savoy sausages, which are not unlike hot dogs. And they are dyed red with carmine dye, which is made from beetles. So they did have that in the Victorian era. They tend to get boiled, these little sausages. I decided to bake them on floral wire. You can see I was doing that there. So that I would be able to string them on a string. And I decided to try browning one side of each one with the pastels. That worked okay. And I put them all on a red string there, as you see. And then a little bit of glaze for that oily shine sausages always have. I got glaze all over my fingers doing this, but that's okay. I decided, because the quote about the sausages says long wreaths of sausages, that I would have some on this cutting board and then draped over the edge so they would hang down along the edge of the table. Which, I don't know, that seems very decadent to me, so I kind of like that idea. Just adjusting it before the glue dries to make sure it hangs down like I want. And then the brawn, which is simply translucent clay with all those little colorful bits I baked up earlier. I baked those as they were. I added them into the soft translucent clay, formed it into a little loaf, baked that, and then when I sliced it, you see, you get little bits of all the things inside. If you're not familiar with brawn or head cheese, it is scraps of meat, usually from the head of a pig or a calf, and then they are mixed into all the jellied stock that you get from boiling up the head. So I know that sounds unpleasant, but it's pretty good. Here I'm making some stone ground mustard, and this is just Mod Podge, which is glaze and glue and dries clear, some yellow oxide colored paint, and then I added some craft sand and a little bit of that the ground coffee as well to make it have a nice chunky light and dark texture like you would want for mustard. I glazed the brawn so it's a little bit shiny. And now I'm making Cumberland sauce, which is some UV resin with red dye. And this sauce is a port wine reduction that has a lot of fruit flavors in it. It makes it like a jelly. It has red currants in it usually, so I'm using my nail art caviar in red to be the red currants. I forgot how staticky it is, so I took the lid off and the little beads exploded everywhere. But because the UV resin is so sticky, I was able to use my little stirring stick and gather them up. And I'm stirring this while I'm setting the resin with the UV light because it makes it kind of chunky, which is what I was looking for. Now these are all done. I will leave you with a look at them, and please join me next time for more foods from the feast table.